Hey, leaders. Welcome to this week's episode of Happy Leader Podcast. I am your host, Coach T Pain, and we're going to jump right into it today. So, we're going to talk about high turnover environments. So, what I mean by a high turnover environment is probably yours, organizations that have a high rate of leadership changes over time. And in high turnover environments, the leaders rotate, are constantly moving in and out the organization, but the team stays put. And as the team stays put, but the leader continues to change, people find themselves wondering in the organization, like, who is this leader? What are they going to change? Is this temporary? How do I feel about this? So that organization is going through a lot of questioning while the leaders of the organization are constantly shifting. So I have a question for you. Can trust actually be built in environments where people don't stay long? And by people, I mean when the leaders of the organization have a regular practice of rotating out consistently, right, at a set time. For instance, in the Department of War, we rotate every 2 years, every 3 years sometimes. So, trust in an organization is important. Trust in an organization requires time to build, usually. But in the organizations that many people work in, time is limited. And so if trust depends only on time, then in a high turnover environment, then your trust is going to be fragile or it may not exist in the organization. So I think a lot of us are sitting in these situations where we're part of organizations, but the organizational trust is in flux, right? And I would dare to say it's might be fluid because those organizations are constantly shifting, adjusting, waiting to see, moving forward with the new leadership that's going to be in charge. So it challenges one thing in an organization, which is stability. Organizations tend to work better in stable environments. At least that's my point of view. But when leadership changes frequently, whether it's by design or by happens or circumstances, the team is still undergoing that turmoil, that transition. Teams experience shifting priorities when the leadership changes. They experience different styles, different expectations when there's a new leader in charge. And they're expected to, as they say, pony up and let's go. But it's important if you're a leader, especially one that's in transitory leadership roles, that you understand what's happening below the level that you lead, what's happening in your organization as people are constantly being subject to different shifts in leadership. Leaders, when we come to organization, we come in and we want to make an impact immediately or at least quickly. So we come in, we want to introduce a new direction, of course. But while we are seeking, and I'm putting myself in the same boat, but while we are seeking to have an impact and to make a difference, that organization is still evaluating. They're in a position of, is this a permanent change that this person's making? Is it temporary? How can I navigate this? Right. So turnover in itself is a lot in an organization, but I believe when it happens at the top level and it's higher that you get in an organization, the more you have turnover, I think the more fluid the trust is going to be in the organization. And when that happens, one of the ways that you can kind of gauge if this is happening. How I've done it before is the organization has a fragile trust foundation or is in an environment where trust is fragile when you sense hesitation by people on your team. You see a lot of, well, let's wait and see, right? A wait and see kind of culture versus the let's get it done culture happens a lot when there's organizational change because you want to wait and see as the person undergoing the leadership change. You want to wait and see because you don't know how what you do is going to influence how you're graded or what gets measured, right? Another thing that is happening in the organization where there's maybe fragile in the trust is there is probably a reduced level of follow through, meaning people will say, yes, ma'am, got it. and then the follow through doesn't happen. And I know we have an episode where we talked about follow through previous, so go check that out. The last one that happens too will sneak up on you, and it is quiet disengagement. When people on the team aren't saying no, they aren't saying yes, they're just kind of quietly like separating themselves from what's going on. And when leadership changes are frequent in an organization, the trust that the people have in the organization, it doesn't just fizzle out and disappear. But every time there's a leadership change, every time a new boss comes in the picture, then that trust has to reset. Now, I want to talk about two types of trust that I've come to understand in my experience. And this is by no means extremely scientific. This is just what I think. What I think is there's basically two types of trust, and we will be good as leaders, good stewards of our leadership positions to be aware and to operate within them. First is relational trust. That's the trust from person to person, right? It's built over time with that specific leader, and it's based on consistency, experience, shared history, some commonalities, what you've seen that leader do in certain circumstances, especially those that matter to you. You build that trust. It is strong. It's a bond that's built on experiences. It's built on your personal perspective of that person. And it's hard to break, when you have that trust. You know, the little example of you pour all these little beads into a jar and you build it slowly over time. And it only takes like, a moment to tip them all over and there's no more trust. Well, when you have a leader that you trust, you have done the work of putting individual beads into that big jar over time, and now your jar is full. And you don't want to spill it over, but you have transition. And so the other type of trust that happens in leadership transitions is a structural trust. This is a trust that's not based on the individual, but is built into how your organization operates. It's built into the processes, the expectations, and my favorite part of leadership discussions is the leadership culture. That this type of structural leadership is not dependent on the one person, and it has a ton of benefits when you can lean into it and focus on building structural trust in your organization because you know as a leader you won't be there long. In high turnover environments, relational trust is limited. It has no other choice but to be limited because, by nature of the turnover rate, the people in the organization will not have the time to build up the trust that typically takes the time when you have a relational trust. So, all is not doom and gloom. The solution is the criticality of building structural trust. And when you as a leader know that you have an extension, right? I'm sorry, you have an expiration date for this leadership experience you're on, it might be a good idea for you to start building structural trust from day one, right? At your own expense, sometimes of personal trust. So if trust is tied to one person, then there's a lot of things that aren't so good about that because once you leave, all the trust goes, right? And the people in the organization have to figure out what do I do with who I buy into now? Like what are we gonna do? What strong leaders do differently than come in and only focus on building individual trust is they anchor to principles and not just the personality. Some ways we can do this as leaders is avoid saying things like, this is how I lead, and maybe try, this is how we operate. This is what we do. This is our standard. When you say things like that, it establishes a clearer leadership principle tied to a structure and not an individual. You also need to repeat the principles of the organization consistently all the time, over and over and over and over. And when you make decisions, publicly tie those decisions back to this is how we do business, this is how we operate, this is our standard. Number two, what leaders can do better when we're in these positions of leadership, but we know we're going to be leaving soon. The number two thing we can do is create transferable consistency. That might sound like a whole mouthful, but you as a leader have the opportunity to do this. You have the same expectation regardless of the leader in your organization. So you create the environment whereby Your people in your organization expect the same type of performance and outcome no matter who the face is that's sitting in the seat of leadership. You do this by having consistent communication patterns, right? Establishing a newsletter or something that's regular that the organization will produce. Predictable decision making approaches. The same goes with rewards and discipline. Make everything predictable and consistent as you know how. Teams will know what to expect, even with change, if you, as the leader, put the work in to establish this level of structural trust. Okay, the third thing we can do is my favorite thing to do a lot of times in leadership, and sometimes it gets me in trouble, is accelerate the thing. So accelerate trust early, like I mentioned before, on day one, when you know you're going to be there for 18 months or 24 months, go ahead and focus on the structural trust. Don't wait months and months to start building the credibility. You have to do it as part of the first order of business, along with the other first orders of business that you have in leadership. But what I want us to do is you communicate clearly in your first interactions with people and you follow through quickly on all your commitments. This way, you create some early visible wins with your teammates and you start getting that structural trust, and you can eliminate or either significantly decrease the uncertainty part that I mentioned, that the organization is looking to the new leader, just wondering, is this lasting? Who is this person? How do I navigate this? A fourth thing, my favorite thing, leadership culture. If you use leadership culture as a mode of stabilization, then you can start helping your organization to have structural trust. And that structural trust will be lasting because you will literally embed it into the organization. It becomes the memory of the organization. It becomes literally, this is what we do. And anything not aligned to what we don't do. You create some shared norms that will outlast you, right? So you're gonna have to put yourself in a place of meekness if you want to build this type of structural trust. You want to reinforce behaviors that align with your culture also. The things that misalign with your culture, you want to swiftly, quickly, and very often publicly deal with those so that you can protect your culture from constant reset, right? There's some things you cannot control. Hierarchical organizations that transition leaders at a significant rate or at a consistent rate, some of that you can't control that. And nor neither can you stay there forever, right? Like you extending your time in that leadership role may not be the thing that's needed. But I'm telling us, if we build structural trust, then we'll get there. The fifth thing, though, that you can do is reinforce expectations repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. I think one of the biggest things you do in leadership is you repeat yourself and then you repeat yourself, repeating yourself to see if you need to repeat yourself again. And the answer is yes. Do not assume that people remember what you say. Don't assume that they got you the first time. Even if they agree with you, they're in alignment with you. People have a lot going on in their minds and working for you. So you want to make sure that you're constantly building clarity and stability in the organization as you go, because that is going to help you to build structural trust in the organization. So that again, the culture of this organization becomes XYZ. And so when other leaders transition in and out of the organization, in the muscle memory of the organization is those standards and expectations. In high turnover environments, consistency must come from the system. It cannot come only from the leader because the leader is going to transition. And as a leader, you don't want to transition that trust with you. You may want to, but you shouldn't. You should want the organization to thrive better than when you first received it. So let me talk about something that breaks in these type of environments. When leaders change direction too quickly, structural trust will break. I won't say it will break, but it has a tendency to become more frail. And it doesn't mean you can't overcome that by the culture or other things in the organization. But when you're a leader and you're new and you have a date and you constantly change, and sometimes that direction change can throw off the structural trust of the organization. Another thing is when leaders come in with inconsistent expectations or inconsistent reactions to situations that are like one another, but the outcomes are different, which is rare that the situations are exactly alike because there's usually something that's different that causes you to act differently. But um, these are things that can happen. The last thing that is crucial to building organizational trust is you cannot focus on your personal leadership so much. You have to focus on building the organizational trust. So teams will quickly inherit your inconsistency as unreliability. They will see you as temporary and therefore will treat you as temporary sometimes. And they will have a lack of alignment with you. And therefore you will not be able to build this trust in the structures that you should be establishing because they will lose that trust by watching your inconsistent performance. Trust is built in patterns that are repeated, not in individual moments that are on the fringes of what you consistently do. So, regardless of if you're building trust for yourself, personal trust, relational trust, or if you're building structural trust, the pattern of what you do in that organization is going to determine if that trust is really built or if it's going to just be fleeting and people trust you, but they don't trust the organization. Um, I want us to think about in our leadership experience being a part of an organization like these that I mentioned that have a leader that's in position, but they're not in position long enough to build relational trust. What are people experiencing in these type of organizations? And specifically for you as the leader, what are people experiencing from you if you are the leader that is in a seat of leadership for just a little while and then you go somewhere else? The second question is what happens if you leave tomorrow, right? Due to turnover things and you have built relational trust and not structural trust. What happens to that organization when you leave? That's just as important as what happens to it while you're there. Ask yourself, are you building something that outlasts you or something that will reset when you leave and then reset when the next person leaves and continue that reset paradigm whereby your organizational trust, the structural trust, never really gets a solid foundation? There's a lot to be said about leading in transition and having this organizations that will trust the structures and not necessarily only trust the leader. Although there are benefits to both, what we should focus on and evaluate ourselves on as leaders is, are we building an organization that will thrive when we pass through? Right? Strong leaders don't just build trust just for themselves while they're in that role. That has a place and you need that. People need to trust you on a personal, relational level. But if you're a really strong leader, you're thinking about the survivability of this organization when I'm out the picture onto the next thing. So you build trust into your systems so that no matter if you are there or not, the trust in the structural organization, it still stays. So, what I want us to do is take a moment to reflect because this might hit home for a lot of us in a lot of different things, especially in organizations that have a high demand, high tempo, high output. They probably have high turnover, and that can be in business, in family, in government. The key is for you to be aware as a leader that what are the conditions that are being set and what does that do to the trust level of your individual level or at the organizational level. If you find yourself having not yet started looking at the organizational trust, the structure of trust in your organization, you may want to consider that because you have an expiration date and you can't just simply stay forever and let people trust you forever and the organization dwell on forever because it's not possible. So I hope that this was helpful to you. If it was, what I really prefer you do before you like and share and subscribe and hopefully comment, what I really like you to do is think about it and have a conversation with your own leadership teams about this topic. Look at your organization's transition history. You could even map out patterns of productivity and leadership changes. Now, I'm not saying to do that to affiliate that when this person was our boss, we did great. And then this person came in and I'm not saying to do that. There's too many factors at play in an organization to do only that. But what I am saying is that you should have the opportunity or make the opportunity to say to your team, all right, I know that I am going to be here for 3 to 4 years. here's some things that I think we want to make sure are lasting when I leave. What are those things? And now you can have your team building sessions off of intentional goals to build the trust in your organization and not necessarily focusing on building your individual trust. Now, you will have to constantly build individual trust. People need to trust you in your organization so that you can lead them, but you don't do one at the expense of the other. I'm asking us to do both. So, have some conversations with your own leadership teams about this topic. Just give it a conversation piece, and maybe you can map out for yourself in your organization where you know there's going to be changeover at different levels, and what can you do right now to consistently or start that consistent building of having a structural trust where people can trust the structure as much as you can. So, and then I would like for you to share and subscribe and comment and like, and hopefully it's all helpful. So until we see each other again in about a week, happy leading.